What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Thanks for joining me for another cognitive conversation. I'm your host, Jay Anarchon, and I'm very, very excited about today's conversation. Joining me today is Micheal Tsarion, and for those of you that don't know him, he is an author, researcher, professional speaker, video producer, musician, astrologer, free human being, and I'm sure much, much more that I'm missing. He's produced a few video series and many, many books, and some of which were very, very influential in my awakening many years ago. And honestly, his efforts are just tireless. He's a producer of the Unslaved podcast, and he's constantly putting out new books, working on new video projects, and like I said, just putting forth that tireless effort and will that we need to see to push humanity forward into a state of freedom. So thanks a lot for joining me, Micheal. How's it going today?
Oh, thanks, Jay. Thanks for the invitation. Everything's really going well. It's kind of a busy week, but a couple of crazy things happened. So change of direction, and I love those.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I know we had to reschedule, but I greatly respect you for coming on and taking the time to speak with me. My show is really young and really small, and not many people out there are willing to take the time to commit to something like this. And I'm not saying that in a condescending or negative way either. I know time is really, really valuable, but I really respect you taking the time to come and talk to me
Well,
today. So.
and when somebody like yourself, who's starting off, has the courtesy to, call me up, I'll definitely want to participate in that, because it's appropriate and, it's respectful. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, awesome. I appreciate that. And, I know you have a lot of new work coming out, and I'm sure a lot of it's relevant to the topic I wanted to discuss today, which is genetic trauma and healing. So, you go over in your Origins and Oracles series quite in depth about the genetic trauma that humanity as a race has sustained, possibly from, turmoil on the planet itself, deluges, and things like that, and then also related to genetic manipulation and a bunch of other factors as well, psychological manipulation, emotional manipulation, that we're seeing on a large scale today. So I really wanted to kind of touch on this topic. I think it's a topic that a lot of people are missing today, and a lot of people are focused on current problems, but my main focus is kind of focusing on the little things that we can do to start healing ourselves and moving ourselves towards a state of freedom. So I really wanted to discuss that genetic trauma with you today, and get your opinions on how we can go about working towards healing ourselves individually and as a race. So.
I mean, that's massive. That's probably the greatest question anybody asks, because it goes to the roots of the whole thing. And you talk about modern day trauma, that's the key.
Yeah.
But I think the healing starts when you know it's trauma. So the healing has already begun when you know about something about trauma.
Yeah.
And then you take it to the next level, right? So imagine a car wreck, a very painful divorce, being told you have a disease of some kind, or coming back from fucking Desert Storm or something like that, right? PTSD. We all know about these kinds of trauma, and we know how devastating it can be to an ontogenetic life.
Mm-hmm.
So all my work is to do, and it follows in the footsteps of, one or two geniuses, unknown today, of course, to point out that if you magnify the type of trauma that we know thousands of times,
yeah,
then you have a picture. Because everybody wants to talk about prehistoric ages. People want to talk about, how the pyramid was built and how the water got on the Sphinx and various subjects about the ancient, even ancient Atlantis.
yeah.
What they've never taken either an existential or a psychological perspective on what might have happened. And a great book was written way, a long time ago called Past Shock by Jack Barringer. And I read that, in 98 or something like that, just prior to the first public talks. And although he didn't dwell on it at all, the seed of something immense was in his book. Mm-hmm. And it covers what we're talking about. And that is that, look, why does nobody ask, when all these cataclysms were happening and stars were, brimstone and, the four horsemen of the apocalypse was riding through the sky, and meteors and comets were falling, and just hail and brimstone was fired on the earth. Did everybody just sit around, enjoying this view like we enjoy, big screen TV extravaganza? Of course not. Human consciousness must have been traumatized.
Oh, for sure.
And that was, I must have, I can't remember what age I was, but by God, that just rang a big bell. And so my work is basically to focus on, let's ask a question about that. Let's probe that. Let's go in deeply to that and see if we can find anything. If we kick a few doors open there, what might we find? What we found was, for myself, it was an entire, vocation to go into it. And when it came to answers, I found the answers. I found the answers to all modern, machinations of the architecture of control. And as you say, it filled my work in one way or another. Sometimes, provisionally, because it would have constituted a digression at that moment.
Sure.
So I had to wait. Okay, let's not do it digressively. That's not going to work. Let's wait. So by the time I got to Origins and Oracles, we were able to put it in, quite a strong theme, actually.
Yeah.
But then from that point on, you see, until present day, it's just been unfolding from that point. But to me, it is the most crucial subject of all. And it involves, consciousness. Consciousness should never be left at the door.
For sure. And, speaking of deluges and whatnot, if we look at the fact that human consciousness is tied to the planet in some respect as well, based on your research, in your opinion, do you think that human consciousness could be causing these deluges, or it's kind of like a reciprocating cycle in a way? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, that's a superb point. Nobody's ever made that point before, and it's absolutely true. There's a Reichian, and believe me, I do not go along with everything he's saying one-to-one, but James DeMille wrote an interesting book called Sahar's-Razia, right? Sahar-Razia. And he turns Reich, he sort of adapts Reich's theories, because Wilhelm Reich is the one who answered that. And he said that the traumatized mind is off kilter, it's shattered, it's fractured. And so then obviously, like any fractured lens, even of her ordinary spectacles, let alone a proper, big lens in a telescope or something, it's going to warp your vision.
Of course.
And so the reality that is indeed traumatized. You repeat the trauma, you cause it again. Like people who are, flight and fight, they're always panicking and paranoid and factoring and scared. The postman rings a bell and that's it. It's a bomb. Don't take it without some pincers.
Yeah.
If you kiss a girl, you can get pregnant. These are the kind of nonsense, right? So yeah, we are on flight or fight still. Now we're moving away in the sort of right direction, but you better believe it that once traumatized, you will shake every time the phone rings. And so this then is a huge piece that hasn't been looked into. Wilhelm Reich was the one who sort of understood it. In fact, he even found science to prove it. Of course, they immediately knock, 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 arrest. He's under arrest for this point, because he had discovered that rain, he had found out that weather, that all sorts of patterns in the weather and the climate are affected by human consciousness. And he wrote very well. In fact, James DeMille's first book, called The Orgone Accumulator Handbook, is actually a masterpiece, and that will go into that. And it's a very slim book, can be read in a day, but by God, he does a beautiful job explaining Reich's theories on the cloud busting and all of that. Yeah. And it's a wonderful book for people who want to know the answer to what you just said, which is how can we as an individual or as a collective affect fate, affect the very world around us, which scientists are always going to deny. They're always going to limit this connection between the microcosm and the macrocosm. But even though it's been devastated and it's been pointed out to them time and time again, how indeed, right? Like when women are pregnant, their mood, their choice of food. I mean, why do we even have to go into this, right? That, there's deep connections between psychic and physical energy. And Reich was the master of explaining those connections.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of what you're talking about, like the energetic body and everything, has really, in science been common knowledge since like the 60s or 70s, right? And the point you brought up about people controlling the weather to some extent, I kind of have a funny anecdote related to that. My daughter asked me how come the weather station online, the Weather Network or whatever, how do they get the weather correct all the time? And I told her, well, they put it on the internet and everybody looks at it and that's what they think the weather will be, so that's what the weather ends up being, right?
You're not that far wrong.
Yeah, for sure.
You're not, and then the next step is, actually, do we do that? You see, so there's a science, there's a study, and some of the greatest scientists, Walter Russell and out there, look, you can get into the story of light You can get into the story of electromagnetism. We did you'd mentioned Unslaved. We did a podcast with a guy called Gregory Sands. It's on the sun.
Okay.
Right? The big ball in the sky. People should go and listen to that. It's absolutely blown away. I read his book and I was absolutely blown away. I thought I knew. And I would say after Wilhelm Reich, there's a theory about photonic light and sunlight. So yeah, there's a lot of sources on that. And it really changes your perspective on how, it's not some idiotic, positive thinking cult or whatever. That veers you off in the wrong direction, actually. No, this is something very authentic and very scientifically valid.
Yeah, for sure. Well, of course, anything with any validity or truth behind it ultimately gets hijacked before it gains any
That's
traction. Right. And obviously, the latest is the New Age craze, because we have all these people that are actually getting their hands on this arcane knowledge and these occult philosophies. So, of course, in swoops the New Age to pervert all of that and essentially take everybody on the left-hand path, right?
Definitely, definitely.
And I love that you brought up the law of correspondence there. It's definitely, I think that's one of the greatest keys to understanding our reality. And in my opinion, that may even be the sole purpose of the physical realm, is to give you something tangible that you can actually, visualize and sense on many different levels, and understand higher realms, right? Like I've noticed the simplest correspondences in the physical realm, just bringing me to an amazing epiphany regarding higher realms. A great example is let's look at the state of decay and growth in the physical realm. Anything in the physical realm, a house, an automobile, your body, whatever you want, if you're not constantly maintaining it and even building it better, doing work to it and making progress, then it's going to decay and wither away. And the same thing applies to our minds and our emotions and our spirit as well, right? So yeah, I definitely agree with you, and the law of correspondence is in my opinion, one of the most overlooked laws in our reality. So, can you speak on that a little bit?
Sure. What you said, I agree with 100%. You see, science has a way of limiting. It's very subtle because its achievements are very great.
Yeah.
And so we extend so much bounty and so much leniency to science that we forget the little devil running alongside it,
Yeah.
which is to actually limit what we know of the capacities of the universe. So I am open to laws of attraction, all those things in a certain sense, because I refuse to limit the possibilities of the universe.
Yeah, exactly.
And as an astrologer, I'm an astrologer as well. And everyone thinks astrology is hogwash. Yeah, because you bought the lie that the universe can't do that. There can be definitely no connection between the stars and consciousness, right?
Yeah.
You see, I don't need to look into whether there is or not. I just hear limitation when somebody says that, and I go, I think you're wrong. See, I'm working on it. I don't have any scientific evidence to back it up. I don't care about it.
Yeah.
All I want is why you have chosen a paradigm that does doubt that.
For sure.
Right? Why would you doubt? When you look at the complexity of our universe and the complexity of the body, when you say you study a bit of sacred geometry or whatever, or just the simple study of light, the complexity alone should tell somebody that science is blinking wrong.
For sure.
When it attempts this scientism, which is to limit. And so studying astrology and those things is exactly why I do it, is to continually keep my mind sharp, to never allow limitation in my view of the possibilities of life or in any other, or certainly not of the universe. It has infinite capacity. It has infinite capability because it's intelligent and alive and thinking. And therefore, then if that is the case, Atlantis is possible and astrology is possible. And you being alive to talk about it with a consciousness that's that evolved is possible. Why limit anything?
For sure.
But coming more honing down on the point is that, you see, my issue has never been really with the law of attraction itself or any of these sort of prosperity cults. I see them for what they are, right? But I must think positive cult only has one flaw, in my opinion. Who is the I that's meant to be thinking positively? So when you say, I must think positive, and all these millennials are jumping in and thinking it's the greatest thing, because in a one way, don't you see, it is a kind of a pseudo-heroism. Those young people are attracted to those books and attracted to that thing because in one positive way, they're looking to change their reality.
That's right.
And you can't fault that. But they need the psychological component, which is never pointed out in these books. because of the darker side of what those books represent.
Yeah.
And that is, who is the I that's thinking positive? Isn't the I? Well, yeah. So how does the I change the I? Don't know. Why are there even two eyes suddenly appeared? There was just one eye for a minute, and now you've introduced a metaphysic of two eyes. Oh my God, we're back to Immanuel Kant. We're back to the deepest philosophy. That means there's two cells, one listening, but the listener must be also a speaker. Well, so is the other one. Yeah. So they're almost identical yet different. What is going on? Well, we're into philosophy and the nature of actual consciousness, and the consciousness is not only a duad. The blinking Egyptian says you got 12 cells. Oh, well, come on, Michael. When does this stop? So this is wow. Jung said you got how many? 9, 10, 11, 16, 14, 600 archetypes, inner guides? Wait a minute. So don't you see then that these little cult books, these little prosperity cult, they're not even scratching the surface of the metaphysics that one needs to get into when you open the door. And so to stick around in that little toddler room, that little playpen, Chuck E. Cheese's, talking about I must think positively, when you have no idea of the I that is doing all of that process, that's a psychological infantilism. And that's why I criticize those books. But I'm not really criticizing the fact that when you personally get up in the morning, your positive thought is going to change your mood and is highly recommended. Of course, only an insane person would but don't do it in a manic way, and don't do it in a way that is editing the dark side of life.
That's right.
Which is unfortunately what most people do, which is not good.
Yeah, for sure. And I totally agree with you. And I'm a practical application kind of guy. So I'm not the type of person to read a book and then decide whether or not it's it's valid or not. I'll take a theory and I'll test it in my life. I'm not afraid to do that. And from personal experience, I would say that the secret specifically is definitely a form of escapism for most people, I think. And then again, one of the biggest problems I've noticed is they're not giving you all of the tools you need. And it's kind of like the Aladdin genie in the lamp kind of scenario where you make a wish and you're not aware of all of the consequences that are related to that wish that you've made. And I'll speak from experience on this. It was about, I guess, 8 years ago when I was kind of getting pulled back into the money game, and I decided to start a corporation. I was starting my business. I was spending a lot of time studying success, and I put a lot of these principles into play, and they are very, very, very powerful. And I achieved results with them, but in a lot of areas, I achieved results so fast that I didn't have the skills built up required to handle a lot of the results that I was producing in my life. And then again, none of these teachings are given with any sense of morality, really. And I'm not, like, without getting abstract or anything and getting into the definition of right or wrong, they just don't really take any consideration into the actions that you're willing to take to achieve your goals. So if you take something like The Secret and you're going to put yourself in a mind state to let's say start a successful business and make more money. Are you going to do this through taking advantage of other people? You know what I mean? Are you going to go about this in an ethical way or an unethical way? But, at the end of the day, I guess that's all just playing on that genetic trauma that is the topic of the show today, and taking advantage of the fact that we don't like our reality and we feel powerless. And I think these little movements that give you even that little piece of power, they're able to suck people right in, and really they're small now. Like if you look at like something like Christianity, there's a lot of structure to this religion. There's a lot of history behind it. You look at something like The Secret, and these guys are able to just print one book now and form societal trends, right? So obviously with mass media and the internet, I think that gives them a lot more power as well. But again, I think that speaks to the trauma and the desire people have to actually regain some sort of control over their life, right? So
there's so much to what you said there. See, in 2 to 3 weeks, we're going to do a thing called Exposing the Secret. That's the title of it now. It may change later on, or maybe it become a subtitle or something, but it's along those lines. And everything you're saying is like pertinent to me. In the last few days, I've been trying to put that slideshow together.
Yeah.
And be fair, to look at the positives and negatives. But the negatives are very, very conspicuous. Yeah. And not only do they deny you tools, like you just said, it might even be worse than that. You see, but in order to prove that, you need to look at the biggest picture of where our societies are going, and you have to have a historical perspective. But I'll just say in brief that, magical child thinking may work, but that then is the carrot that leads us over the edge in the longer run. You know what I mean? Because the will, it all boils down to what your will is capable of. And the will is capable of anything, right? It's built our world. It's built our civilization. It's fought back the powers of darkness in many, many ways, right? It works on the individual level, and it works on the collective level. And so these people are aware of this great untamed horse called the will. And so they've built this, law of attraction philosophy around it. And I think on some level, I think the big danger is because it works. You see, it sounds so paradoxical to say that. If something works, Michael, and it's going to make me rich or get me that parking space, what are you knocking it for?
Well, it's a baby with a loaded gun.
That's right.
Yeah, right.
Right, because now that you've got that, watch the will's daemonic. I didn't say demonic, I say daemonic, thonic, untamed, id. The id behind goes, hey, want more. It's like the guy who gambles a little bit and then he becomes, obsessed by it. So definitely, there are those dangers. I think in the right hands, it's fine. In the wrong hands, it's not. But there's so much to unpack there. One thing also must be said to people who may be new to this is that, this is a bona fide Gnostic cult. They peddle idolatrous cultism.
That's right.
And they're funded by the United Nations. And so don't be fooled by a lot of these big, big blockbusters. You mentioned how successful they've become. And that must be footnoted by saying, yeah, there's a reason. It's not just the media hooking onto it positively to facilitate positive change. If you get on Oprah and you get, other stamps of approval by this Deepak Chopra types, who are the most demonic people, these people are highly funded by some very dark cults that most people don't know anything about, coming out of the East. Mm-hmm. We all know about certain Western cults and Western boogaloo groups, but not many people ever know about the Eastern version of these. And they're basically, to use the word in its broadest sense, Gnostic. And people need to know about it, and there's a long story there. I'll be unpacking that in my own work as we go, trying to substantiate statements like that, and then people are free to pick it up and say, well, you got something there, or no, I can't accept that. That's rude. This is just coincidence. This whole spinner rack, this torrent of books just accidentally came out all at the same time, right? Yeah. Okay, fine. Go ahead. Believe it,
Well, again, though, just like I brought up with The Secret, like obviously the reason these are so successful is they're founded in, probably 60-70% truth, right? And then it's the key points that you're missing. One of my favorite books is the Kybalion, and I'm actually reading it again right now for like the 4th or 5th time. And every time I read this book, it blows my mind again and again and again, right? But what I've realized in my deeper occult studies, especially with the Kybalion, is all these success teachings are essentially dark magic, right? They're teaching you to be very selfish. It's all a me attitude. There's no consideration for other people or the human race as a whole in any of these teachings. And most of them are specifically geared towards helping you attain material goals. So again, we're using these occult teachings that are mystical, spiritual teachings, and we're keeping people locked into that materialist perspective, which is obviously the base level, and you can only go up from there. So I'd like to get your opinion on this. It was sort of an epiphany that I came to recently myself. So if we were to look at the universe as a mental projection of the all or source or however you want to call it, I don't know if you agree with what I'm saying so far, but if we were to look at the universe as a mental creation of the all and use the law of correspondence, then would that mean that our physical bodies are actually a mental creation of ourselves? And science has gone a long way to proving this, how most matter is mostly made up of nothing anyway. And obviously, if we were to take all of our forms of perception away from ourselves, the physical reality we know as we know it would not really exist. So I'd really like to get your opinion on that, actually.
Yes, let me talk about that, but then let me just go back briefly what you said there before. See, magical child thinking, what was the train I had there? I wanted to say one more thing about this group that you mentioned in these books. It'll come to me probably.
Yeah, I
right?
think
But
I was talking about the Kybalion and
yeah. Oh, when you said that those books are immoral, the other ones, you're quite right. Magical child thinking equals narcissism. Narcissism equals magical child thinking.
Sure.
And they keep you in that, cyclone.
Yeah.
And the other doesn't even matter. But that's deeper than that. The problem is even deeper than that. The other is also yourself. In other words, to put it more simply, when we talk about, we have relationships, yes, but you also have one with yourself. It's the most primary empathic relationship you have. Yeah. So what these people do by spinning you out into the narcissistic mode is to cease to void the relationship with yourself.
Yeah.
So again, it's done very Svengali-like, and you're after some trinket, like the monkey, right? Grabbing the jar and putting his fist inside. So you're after that prize, and you don't even realize what is the danger of it, right? Yeah. And this is, again, nothing to critique the essentiality of having a positive outlook on life. I mean, that's almost axiomatic. Why do you even need one book to tell you that?
Of course.
But getting to the point you just made, everything is an idea. All right? So the physical body is an idea. You have an idea of it. You have an idea of the external world. I'm doing a series on idealism right now. So your idea of the creator is an idea. His idea of you is an idea. Mm-hmm. The idea is God. The idea is spirit. Schelling said something along those lines. He says, reason doesn't have an idea of God. Reason is God.
Yeah.
Or spirit, right? And meaning that the very capacity you have, and Blake would have frowned on the word reason, and would have preferred, say, imagination, but that's all semantics. The point is taken that both these thinkers and thinkers of like that, idealists in general, are saying that, look, your imaginations, your capacity for fantasy making, the very fact that if somebody says to a child, there's a God, whatever spontaneously comes to the child's mind is God.
Yeah.
God has given ultimate freedom, or the spirit has given ultimate freedom for you to form any kind of thought pattern, around that, which is really a set of images. That's what's called imagination, right? Yeah. And it's very hard for people to realize that the material world and your body are born out of the same imaginings. It's just that imagination, the only way to say it easily is this, and that is that when the materialist, who's the opposite of an idealist, right, is a materialist, and the materialist is erroneous, but what their premise is, there's a concrete world out there, for goodness sake, I can kick it. The old rubric where they lampooned Dr. Johnson or Dr. Johnson lampooned the idealist when he kicked a stone, and he smarted his foot and goes, that's real enough, all this nonsense to try and discredit the idealist. But the idealist isn't saying it's not there. A whole campaign actually lasting hundreds of years, a conspiratorial one was there to instantiate the lies of materialism. Mm-hmm. But what they were saying was, look, this glass, right, this cup, its so-called materiality, its so-called concreteness is the idea. It's not that it doesn't exist as a concrete thing. It does. But your idea that you made in your mind, what is something to be concrete? Concreteness is idealistic. Yeah. And that's the part that people can't understand, because it demands thought. Anything that's very, very great, you said it earlier, needs rumination and needs contemplation, not from some teacher at the front of the class, but you must sit with the things of the world and sort of understand how they're instantiated ideas. And what does that mean? The thing's false and it doesn't exist? If I beat my head up against it, it'll hurt, right? Yes, we're not talking about that it's not there in a concrete way, but concreteness. We live in a concrete world that is original in an idea. We have the idea of concreteness, and then we live within that idea. And the man who's transcended it, say, no longer lives in that concrete world. Well, that's when his eyes are open, as Blake said. and the doors of perception are thrown open, right? And one sees things as they truly are, infinite.
Yeah.
But that's the Siddhartha road. Then the next question is, how do I get to that kind of vision? And everybody's selling you some technique.
Of course.
Everybody.
Well, the funny thing is that really gets back to narcissism, like you mentioned before, because people have this, fear that if they're wrong or what they believe it doesn't correlate with reality, it somehow makes reality less valid. But it doesn't. Just because you misunderstand something, or something operates in a manner that we may not be able to explain to the human mind, doesn't change its validity or anything like that, right? So regardless, yeah, let's say the whole physical world doesn't really exist, and there is no such thing as matter, and there is really nothing that you can touch. That doesn't change why we're here. It doesn't change that we can experience it the way we can. Like you said, even if it is all illusory in some way, we still can feel our head banging on that wall. So it is still real to us, in the state we're in and the way we perceive it. So in my opinion, I think that a lot of that takes away from the point. It's like debating politics, right? Like, why are we debating politics when government's the source of many of the problems? Let's just look at the root of it, and many subjects are like that. It's like the teachings of Christ, right? It's really irrelevant whether or not he existed, but people want to debate that all day long instead of looking at the actual teachings of Christ and trying to live in that fashion, right? So I think, even with history, right? Like, obviously a lot of your work is related to history, and like I mentioned earlier, it totally changed my life, gave me a new perspective on that subject, and a desire to investigate it for myself. But really, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, a lot of it. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's good to know where you came from and whatnot, but, whether or not a specific nation was named a specific name thousands of years ago, that's a topic we could debate all day long without hitting any of the relevant points, right? So,
you see, yeah, the way I like to put it usually is that the idealists say that existence itself is an idea. So, and all the efforts then of these materialists is utterly spurious. It's almost like either they didn't get the point or they didn't want to get the point. And it's really, if you study it, the latter is the case. They damn well knew what the German idealists were teaching, and they didn't like it because it empowered people.
Yeah.
And so they set up our positivism, our materialism, our critical theory, our postmodernism, all of that came spewing out of their reinterpretations of Schopenhauer, Nietzsche. And then those two guys had also lampooned, the idealists. And so the big hodgepodge was made, which we now basically know as materialism. And it came out of socialists. It came out of the most arch socialists that you could ever imagine, right? The real Fabian socialists, Karl Popper and Jacques Derrida and all of that. And so it has many threads. But going back to what idealism says, that look, existence is an idea, but it's a bigger idea than you could create. You couldn't create that idea in your mind. So there's obviously a spirit, because they used a lot of these as proofs of spirit, and they're very cogent actually. Yeah. That's exactly how spirit acts. And so then one says, yes, okay, so I am a thought then in the body of God, which the materialist goes, yeah, and if it's true, look how insubstantial you are. Look how derivative that is. You see, they try to make it like it's an illusion. Are we just a projection or a hologram? Yeah. That's not what the idealist said. The idealist says you're more real by being in the spiritual context. If what we're saying is right and spirit thought you up, that is as real can be. That is the realest of realities.
Yeah.
But they, again, didn't like that. So they had to, censor it. They had to misinterpret it, basically, is the way they did it. And there was a whole story about that, how Hegel was misinterpreted, Schelling, Goethe, all the, Steiner, Emerson in America, in your own country. So there's a whole story about how each one of these people, I touch on it in an article I've got on my own website under articles called Mysticism. And if people read that, they'll get a little bit of a preview, a little bit of an introduction, about how, and they're still doing it, you see. The sad thing is these neo-materialists now in Berkeley and other places are still on this bandwagon. The thing is that their arguments now are even more threadbare, even though they're highly publicized, highly funded, and stamped with approval and kisses, lots of X's. The actual arguments are pathetic, right? Anybody with even a modicum of intelligence can see through this neo-materialism, but it's still going strong. Steven Pinker, says poetry was rubbish. It's rubbish. Poetry's meaningless. It's meaningless. He said it. Hail the priests.
For sure. One thing I'd like to bring up that I've noticed in my research is if you go back to the early 1900s, I'm saying like 1905, and maybe the late 1800s, it seemed that ego had a different definition than, kind of like post-Jung. And it seems like Jung kind of took the concept of ego and made it into something more mental and physical, and before that it was more of a spiritual concept. Can you speak on that at all?
No, that is very new to me. That's extremely interesting, though.
Yeah.
But what? All I can say about it is that all paradigms change over time. We're going to be doing something called Prisoners of Childhood, in which we look at the phenomena of childhood and how that has morphed and done unbelievable flips down, through the centuries. Even in the 20th century, it changed about a dozen times.
Yeah.
But you're quite right. I would see, well, what does leap to mind, of course, is the all-important Eastern versus Western interpretation. And I absolutely object to the Eastern interpretation of ego, right? Yeah. Something to be dissolved, something to be trained, something to be checked, something to be silenced. Mm-hmm. This is all absolute nonsense. It's not even consistent with the original Eastern teachings, which if you go back, early to the pre-Vedic period, you'll never get anything like that, right? Mm-hmm. This is all priest-lip. It's their version of selling you the priests. It's awful. It's just look what it's made of the country. Look at the state they're in over there, right? Yeah. And then if you actually buy into that lie, now you need the techniques of auto-hypnotism to make it work. Since it's completely unnatural, you don't crush any part of yourself. See, what they call mastery is false. Mm-hmm. Right? When you go mastering yourself, gaining enlightenment. No, the real mastery is the ending of a master and slave dynamic within yourself. Oops. Yeah. Right? So, and that entails no concentration, no effort with, in the way that, it would be more like what the Taoists try to tell you is wu wei, letting go and putting up your sail and letting life guide you to where you need to be. That's not part of Eastern mysticism. That's been shunted aside. Thank goodness a little bit of it remains over there in Japan, right? Yeah. China, whatever, right? A little bit of Zen thrown in. But it was taught by the Druids, right? It was taught by the Druids in ancient times. But the basic fact is this, and that is that those Eastern mystical practices are generally worthless, right? From beginning to end. And they weren't even taught. They originated after the Puranas and the Vedic period. And in the West, what you have is a different understanding of ego, which then brings in, if you're reading your Ayn Rand's, then it brings in the idea of strengthening the ego even, and perhaps, heroism and all of those things. So that also factors in. But remember, every structure, if we want to use that term, of the psyche has both, is bivalent. It has a positive and a negative. Just like in the body, if you overeat or undersleep, right, or push yourself too far, even the body's culture, you can only take it so far. Some guy can run 100 miles, another guy shouldn't even jog at all, right? Yeah. And so on. So it's the same thing with the ego, the id, and the super ego. There's very positive aspects of that, and should be championed. We know about their anatomy, and there's deadly parts of every single thing. So, there's no negating of any of these things. It's what's called, equilibrium. Yeah. We try to see, the good part of the ego is freedom. There's only one part of us that even would care about freedom, adore freedom, or want to be free, and that's the ego. And so once you know that, when somebody's described that to you, he goes, oh, now I understand. Or answer your question more specifically, the real way to understand it is the Reichian way again. Wilhelm Reich's idea that the ego, the id, and the superego are structures. They're bioenergetic fields. They are not architectonic, structures like Freud presented it. That Reich always thought that the Freudian, model had flaws, and so he changed it right into this bioenergetic, psychosomatic structure in which the ego is the exterior of the body. The superego would be the musculature and the armoring, and the id would be the energetic, pure, core, let's say. And then the interaction of those three, they're actually physical, bioenergetic structures, changes everything we know about psychology and everything we know about philosophy. And that's why Reich had to go to jail and died in Stockade. because just like Tesla, it was Reich who was the first man to have his books burned in America. That is all you need to know. That is it. That is it. Look for the man whose books were first burned, and you got the man who's had the truth. It's not that hard.
Yeah. Yeah, I love the points you made there, and honestly, you kind of gave me shivers there when you said that we need to end the slave and master dynamic within ourselves, right? And again, we're getting to the law of correspondence, as within, as without. How are we to treat each other in a free, loving manner if we can't even do that with ourselves, right?
Well, you can.
That's right, and
It's a pretense at that point, hypocritical pretense.
for sure. And I've just the same as anybody else been really struggling with the fact that it's so hard to get the average person to come to terms with any of these concepts when they're so simple. And to me, I think it really comes down to physical health. The fluoride in the water and the food and the toxicity in the air and everything. I really can't come up with any other reason aside from, I guess, the mental and genetic trauma. Everybody's so afraid of coming to terms with the fact that they're fucked up, right? And you know what? One term that I'm really sick of hearing is good person. Oh, he's a good person. Yeah, she's a good person, right? People think that going to work every day and working your slave job and paying your taxes under coercion makes you a good person, and these people, they don't spend any time with their children and really don't care about anything deeper than their basic physical desires and needs. Eat, sleep, fight, and fuck is pretty much what most people do, right? So yeah, I've kind of in my own life taken physical health and nutrition as a priority and tried to kind of express that to people that I know, because in my opinion, I think that clearing your mind up and cleansing your body can go a long way to helping you achieve some sort of level of healing within yourself. And you brought up the self-mastery earlier, again, related to that slave and master dynamic within yourself. Would you be able to distinguish, or sorry, just go into that a little bit more for us, and describe what a slave and master relationship with yourself would consist of?
Well, first of all, you have it the Reich used the science to show armoring, body armoring. That's the evidence of it, right? In the Freudian model, the superego controls the mind, controls the ego, leads it to identify with social norms and standards, right? And then represses. It's the agent of repression. But what Reich's masterstroke was that he showed that the stiffening and armoring of your body, right, is the physical, the somatic, right, manifestation of the superego structure that constricts and it's like canalizes the energy. It doesn't allow it to come forth to the surface.
Sure.
So it's like a valve that controls bioenergy, right? And too much armoring will definitely cause poor health. So right away, what he was saying, and Arthur Yanov also believed this, that just by a person's structure, just by a person's walk, just by a person's, if you touch their body, different pains that they have, or just tightness, you know what I mean, is signs of this master-slave dynamic.
Yeah.
Then there is other ones, because to really understand it, you've got to go to the root of what I call the contrarium, which is that in every single part of life, from consciousness to the so-called material, there's a duad. It's known as dialectical monism in philosophy. And that is that everything has its opposite, black, white, up and down, life and death, flex and unflex and things like that. So, and breath, inhale, exhale. So there's already that contrarium in your being, mind, body, left hemisphere, right hemisphere, right? Masculine, feminine, as I said, inhale, exhale. So when you understand that this is the base of everything, then you already realize you're set up for the master slave, that the master slave is actually quite, I would never say natural, but it's almost like the system itself, because all it is in a slight that master slave, right? But if you've already got If all life is a manifestation of the contrarian, then it almost goes without saying that this could easily become the other, the next. So there's something sort of almost natural or pseudo-natural about the master-slave relationship. But how it really comes online can't be explained unless you have psychology. So that's why psychology is necessary. That's why psychology is a progress upon science and philosophy. And that is because it shows you how this came about in the individual's life, the master-slave. And that is simply that, because of repression, and that is all based on the treatment that you had with your parents, the first environment that you knew, you repress legitimate aspects of yourself. And then a whole syndrome of hierarchical sort of structures come in, because you're unnatural now, right? You're not human. Yeah. You're human, but you're not a being. Your beingness has been crushed. Your identity's been crushed. Your will has been crushed. And then from the Oedipal stages onwards, in fact, that's what the Oedipal stages are, is a reconstitution of your psyche, not around conscience and self, but around superego and ego. Mm-hmm. And those structures are hierarchical. So a master-slave, relationship comes along like that. Hegel said it slightly differently. He said any encounter with another human being immediately starts off with master-slave, because it's you and the other is a threat. It's meant to be. This is ontological. It's meant to start like this. He wasn't against it, because he said that from that basis of seeing somebody as a threat, we gain sophistication. This is highly condensed, but he would say that now, in order to get along with that person, you start to see that you need them very badly, that they matter. And then as time goes by, you start to see that what you're really seeing in the other is aspects of yourself, and that the other is also seeing aspects of themselves. And so this bizarre maturation process is involved. Some people never get there and they don't know what we're talking about. But in general, he said, society, right, evolves. He always talked about the Western society being a little bit more advanced with this. They really caught the idea, and people can think of that as being wrong or right. But he understood that the highest civilization is based on this. They call it Mitwelt, or Mitweld in German, right, which is the with world. And that the with world, and we call it culture or civilization, cannot exist. But it starts with the master-slave and then progresses from there into a kind of we hate to use this word now, equality, because it's been so banjaxed. But he meant it in a pure philosophical sense of the real equalization, in which you discover not only that each person is, I don't even like to use that word now. You can't even use the word equal without it sounding some social justice warrior statement. Yeah. See how the damage is being done? But what he really meant was that you not only now see eye to eye, or you have this interactivity on more of an equal basis and all of that, you end the master-slave. Both parties are aware of the process that got them there. So this is what is usually never spoken of, that you can't get to that moment of complete synthesis unless you've been aware of the remarkableness or the miraculousness of the process that got you there, right? So this is what he called the absolute idea. Not that you should find yourself all happy now, right, and enlightened now, but you're aware of the micro steps of an immense, right, an august process that got you there. That is his absolute idea. Of course, people misinterpreted that to the cows came home, and they misinterpreted every other aspect of his philosophy. But it's a beautiful philosophy. He says that your relationship with others always starts off as a hostility, and then slowly. And I can, I've things in my life that absolutely, vindicate that fact. Yeah. Yeah. So, one can draw it out from that point on. But yeah, there is a master-slave relationship. The more extreme version would be of it, overeating, coming back to your premise, a person who's overeating is just ruining, is obviously doing something to hurt themselves. Yeah. Taking drugs, right? Constantly, being in a flight or fight mood, being hostile to the world, always having to will things, and not let go ever. Always be controlling, and always be very hostile to people who have different ideas than you or whatever. All of these are signs of this damage of the master-slave relationship within. But it can go from the most technical and scientific proofs up to the most abstract philosophical proofs, about how a person, for instance, the kid who stamps on butterflies or pulls leaves off trees, right? He's in a master-slave relationship with the world. Yeah. It's just as simple as that. And so it can become, these people who, can watch animals going into slaughterhouses and everybody's puking and one guy going, oh, so what? Doesn't affect me. Yeah, I'm worried about that kid, right?
Yeah, exactly.
fucking hell, right? So, yeah, and that happens. We are surrounded with people like that. Professor Tolkien noticed that when he was in the trenches, he saw fear, he saw, bravery, but he also saw sadomasochism and out sadism from people who love being there and love the idea that they could go and murder and kill. So it's all about, what's that all about? Why would anybody even be lusting, after carnage and death in that way? You can tell me that person's balanced?
Yeah. So obviously we get into like primary and secondary psychopathy at that point as well too, because we have real psychopaths in the world, which obviously wouldn't feel any emotion attached to and act like that. And then we have the secondary psychopaths who I think mostly emulate true psychopaths, because true psychopaths rule the world, right? And it's kind of like that starstruck, just want to be psychopath kind of mentality. And I definitely noticed that a lot in the corporate world. Business is very, very dishonest. It's all about making as much as you can off your customer and paying your workers as little as you can, right? I was very, very surprised, I guess, coming into it out of ignorance at the level of dishonesty and legitimate business. And I'll openly state as well, in my younger years I was involved in a lot of illegitimate business, quote unquote, but there's a lot more honor and a lot more respect on the street than there is in the legitimate business corporate world. And I think both are founded in that psychopathy, but I guess you kind of have the law behind you when you're in the legitimate world, right? And when you're on the illegitimate side of things, all you have is yourself, and you have to stand behind everything you do, right?
That's right.
Going back to what you were saying earlier about the master-slave dynamic and recognizing things in other people that you don't like about yourself. Being a father, and anybody who's a parent will recognize what I'm talking about as soon as they hear it, if they haven't recognized it already. I often say that your child is a reflection of all the things that you hate about yourself, right? Because all of the bad habits that your child picks up and all of the things that they do that kind of get on your nerves, they're all things that you've taught them, right? So whenever my daughter kind of starts pushing me over to the edge, I have to kind of step back and ask myself, do I act this way, right? And it's a very blatant example. I think it's much more noticeable because you spend so much time with them as well, as opposed to like a casual acquaintance or whatnot. But yeah, I've definitely seen the physical evidence of what you're talking about in my own life, and I would say that it's it's definitely based in truth. And again, we need to start looking at our reality. People are too ready to accept the ideas and philosophies of anybody else. And even if somebody like yourself was to postulate a theory that I didn't necessarily agree with, I do my best to study it a little further and test it out in my own life if it was something that seemed like it would be something I wanted to apply for myself. I definitely agree with everything you were saying about psychology, and like I say, I've seen the physical evidence. So
Yeah, the adultism. Remember, we even said that one of the main instantiations of the master-slave is the parental-child relationship.
yeah.
So that's one of the big. I mean, you could almost cancel out all the other metaphysical things I said about the underlying contrarium. That's all philosophy, very interesting and everything. But the real practical application of a hierarchy within your mind, and it's not even a good hierarchy. The body's based on hierarchy, so it's not that hierarchy is bad. But it's a necrophilous hierarchy that the parents who are older and they've had to conform to the world, so they become agents of the world. They become agents of this toxic myth world we're speaking about. And the child's vulnerable and extremely open, right? And then a whole dynamic starts taking place where the master slave, the art is almost like the concrete poured, and the child will find a devil of a time breaking free from that. And in fact, there can even be pathology in breaking free to try to be, natural like you were before. That can completely get derailed as well. When you even realize what's going on, do you realize the effort it takes then to, confront that, say as a 20 something, or 30 something, don't you have to be getting on and doing other things in the world, in this crazy world, to
Oh,
gain
I
success?
know, I've done it. So
Right.
yeah,
See,
yeah, it's
yeah,
brutal.
it becomes very, very, and it's tremendously sad, that has to happen, that you have to spend vital time picking up the pieces, and I don't think I'll be right with that. I don't think it's a good thing. You have
Yeah,
to do it. You have to commit to it anyway, but it's no reason for you to think it's a damn good thing to be so messed up, and then you have to spend your own valuable time when everybody else is, hitting the beach and champagne cocktails all around kind of thing. It can really make you depressed, but you have to then always frame it in terms of the holy work, that no matter how late it is or no matter how effort it takes, you'll come out with treasures from this that other people do not have,
yeah,
right? The fortitude, insight, psychological insight, inner power and strength, that is second to none. You have to look at it in terms always of, what you'll come out with it. And as you said earlier, it's almost impossible to translate, or to get people, interested. So my personal philosophy is to never, never do it unless you're asked by somebody about a subject to explain it. Never, ever open that door.
yeah,
There's nothing but evil comes from that.
yeah,
Those people will not like you. They will not respect you, even if they're nodding away and pretending to smile. And, oh, this is really great. I'm so glad, even if tears are falling of apparent gratitude and joy, don't be fooled.
yeah,
You'll never gain any spots by trying to hold a candle for somebody else to raise them up any higher. There's only one person who can do that, and that's them.
yeah,
And then when they come sincerely to you, yes, you do have a right at that point. But even then, I recommend a highly stoical disposition,
yeah,
not detached and cold, but like a teacher. Like, yeah, okay, we did this far. That's all I have to say on it right now. You don't compromise any of your own time, your own finances, or your own effort or will. Never, ever, ever
mm-hmm.
do it. Do it well. Do it, and your own time and your own self. And start giving the philosophy for dummies lecture. No, you have to be very cautious, especially today, because many toxic, lost people who just love to eat up your time. Eat up your time, having you fill their empty pockets.
Yeah. Oh, I love that you brought up that point, and that's been a recent conclusion that I've came to as well. And I still will maybe mention something to somebody if they don't know that I have those tools. So if I see somebody struggling, I might be like, oh, time management can go a long way to helping you with this situation. But like you said, I'm not going to go out of my way to do that, but I might bring it up just so that they know the tool is available. But I like what you said, because getting to like the succubus concept, right? And yeah, we do have a lot of people like that in our society, emotional vampires especially. I have a couple people that anytime they call me, it's really just to unload all of their problems on me. And not that I expect anything, but why don't it'd be nice to get a call, just, hey man, how you doing, for once. You know what I mean? Somebody calling you and listing off every problem they have in their life like nobody else has any problems, right? And
Extraordinary.
oh, it's ridiculous, right?
I wouldn't
And
put up with that. I would
yeah,
not put up with that. If it's a genuine problem, you then decide at that point, because remember, there's an archetype of altruism within all of us. If you see somebody is falling down the street, you pick them up. If somebody needs the time, you tell them what it is.
yeah,
One could go on ad infinitum about helping the community and helping other people. It's not that I'm against that. Far from it. It's the way that you help them, and it's also based in your reason and your judgment and your state of values. You
yeah,
don't help people, and you don't promote people who don't share your values,
yeah,
or who actually want to come in and tear your values up.
yeah,
But if a person shares your values, then yes, to that person is a comrade,
yeah,
and they share your values, and they die for you and you die for them. So it's about valuation. And also remember, some people have more energy physically than other people, and maybe those people can do a little bit more helping than somebody who's been exhausted by a lot of vampires in the past. So
yeah,
again, it's an open, it's not a formulaic thing where that's it, make sure everybody tests, you test everybody, but it's rational to do that as well, because there are people in the majority now who are very empty and very lost. And it seems to be that when they're at their most lost, they turn around the corner and find this subject matter, these alternative subjects. Great, I'm home, right? And I don't know why it is. Maybe it was like religion in the days gone by that they did this. But this movement right now is absolutely infested, right, with constitutional, moral inferiors, and that's being polite.
Yeah.
Right. Not to mention communists and socialists and whatever else. So that's an evidence. That's a litmus test for me. In this movement, which I've been part of for such a long time, to see it change. To see the next crew come on board. But where do these orcs decide to take a holiday? And so you have to be aware of that. They're sort of like moths attracted to the flame. Yeah. And they need light. They need light very badly. And they find a little place where there's quite a lot of real light, and they just crowd around it. Yeah. And unfortunately, it's not a good thing. And you can have that happen in your individual life. And I've done, programs and writings on that just in case that should happen to somebody. But because it's almost like remember that it's like the self needs to be fortified. It needs to go through, the tempering process. And so sometimes, when you meet these narcissists, and they are like children, they're in one sense, right? They put on a very, very good mask of being adult and giving and all that, in the beginning and everything, right? But really they're children in a very specific sense. They're infantile. They're what archetypally would be called innocence, but not in a good way. There's good innocence and there's bad innocence. Yeah. And their innocence is like, I don't need to work. I don't want to put in any effort to be a self. Yeah. I'll just find out what selves are. And I find they're good people. They're giving people. This is brilliant. I'm signing on for that. And just use you then, you see, as a complete surrogate self to supply whatever is needed. Narcissistic supply. Yeah. And you've got to be damn well, at least you have to have a meter in your back pocket. That's what I'm saying. Don't be vigilant and ruin your own life by being vigilant. Yeah. But have the tool so that if indeed you need to use it, you're up to speed and you can use it and then act accordingly. That's very vital.
Yeah, sure. So in your opinion then, would ignorance be the polar opposite of innocence then?
No, because there's one part of heroic knowledge is to have a light hold on what you know. And that's innocence. Innocence in the mature way is to say, I believe this thoroughly. I'll die for this. But at the same time, to always say, I could be wrong. Yeah. Or I have this knowledge, but I also have reset moments, right, in which I can put it down. Jimmy Page said something once. He said, for 2 years, I put the guitar down and I never touched it. And to me, I've always taken that, as meaningless. So it's not that you now sign off about having a meaning. Well, I have a light hold and everything because I'm just one of these superficial episodics. You can sound like that very easily. No, that's not what I mean. I mean ritually be able to step back from yourself to view yourself in another way, right? Yeah. It's part of this lightness of being. It's part of this thing of the fool goes around with a very small pack on his back and he's able to open it and look at all the things that he has and he says, are these mine? Yeah. Why did I need this, right? Or what, so it's like a very light and loving relationship with life itself in which you can at a given point utterly transform, like the chrysalis, the butterfly from the cocoon, right? Yeah. And so that's what I mean. Not, it's something to do with like Crowley's magical will is what it's really all about, in which you hold the opposite of everything that you espouse, everything that you hold sacred. You're equally aware of its refutation and its opposite. Now, we don't have people like that, and we don't have educational systems that teach it. Yeah. Nobody, not even Jordan Peterson, any of these people know nothing about this, right? This is a very advanced state. It's in the zodiac. The sign of Libra represents this. And it's for everybody to go through that particular challenge. But it doesn't mean that you now... See, when we speak in English vernacular, it sounds like I'm rejecting or throwing down what I believed, that I'm renouncing it. This is the unfortunateness of the English language. It doesn't mean that at all. It's a point of rest. It's a point of, the sea isn't moving. It's not taking you anywhere. Right. Benefit from that complete stillness of the lake or the ocean. Don't get all panicked and frustrated. Why not sit and enjoy it, right? Mm-hmm. So there are moments like this in life, and you can bring them upon yourself In the height of the battle, there's that, in the cyclone, there's the eye of the storm. So it's a kind of a spiritual principle that most people don't even know anything about. Yeah. And you can do it bioenergetically, and you can do it in everything you believe. And then out of that comes a new revelation that may strengthen what you believe, or it may weaken it in a certain way. It's a principle, right? The Libra, the Hebrew letter of that sign, is the tallest in the Hebrew language. Lamed, right? It's the tallest physical character. Yeah. And so it's tall for a reason, because it's overlooking the others. It's surveilling what you know. It's surveilling who you are. Yeah. And sometimes it can say, by a bit of side lighting, or like this moment of reset we're talking about, or the intrusion of a miraculous thing in life. There's multiple ways this happens, but a great deal of what you have now, it's like arranging like arranging a bowl full of stones, or you have the runes, and every day you mix them up again to create a new pattern in the runes, right? Or stones or minerals. You have to do that with your psyche. It's not about letting go of the thing that you thought. It's still in the same bowl.
Yeah.
But it's just a different arrangement. And so this is a flexibility, mutability, and ultimately a deep sensitization to the flow, to the Wu Wei. And that's essential. And we're missing that. We're missing that in all of these paradigms.
Oh, I love that analogy of the runes in the bowl. And essentially what you're talking about as well does come out of a level of self-control and using your will to pull yourself back as an observer to your emotions. Am I correct on that?
Yes, right. Just in the same way that you would engage with a person like we are doing now, right? With that level of interest, you have to step back and be able to mirror yourself in a strange sort of way. The mind actually has natural capacities for doing this, by the way. It's just that we're not taught how to do it, right?
Yeah.
As I said, the contrarium within, one of the biggest ones, if not the biggest, is between the conscience, which is really the synonym for the self, and the ego.
Yeah.
Right? And the superego and its morality is the pseudo-morality that is articulated to the world and adjusted to what the world wants. And then the conscience is the one that is the voice of shame or guilt within, that transcends that and says, this is wrong on a much deeper level. What it means is you're really violating yourself. Right? The conscience lets you know when you're violating yourself, and you get shame from that. The ego generates guilt for violating the norms of the society or other people. Yeah. And we are not taught how to distinguish between those things. Well, we're making great progress here. We're all modern.
Yeah.
But psychology focuses on this. So you've already got this, and during life, there'll be flips back and forth, right? Somebody who's been very much in the conscience, but who's been punished and suffered for sticking to their guns might just go, you know what, I give up. I mean, you've written me the rules. I've read them. Yeah. Right, I'm joining you. I didn't write those rules, but I can play by them as well. And they become more, articulated to the superego.
Yeah.
Then there's people who've lived in the superego all their life, and then they have this peak moment where they think they've become spiritualized. And to a degree they have, because now they start listening to the voice of the conscience. Like that, work, for instance, says, no more, no more, no more. I can't sign on for this anymore. Or a person in a marriage who goes, you've boozed away and you've gambled away all your money and all my money. No, it's not good enough. We could have been spending that on something positive, and walks away. Yeah. So listening to these two internal voices is very much indicative of what we're saying here. And so, but the thing is that in order to undercut the power of the superego, these practices we've just been describing are also very, very necessary, because it's quite a lot of work to orient back to the voice of the conscience or the self. It's not easy work. It's really shadow work in its essence, but that needs to be unpacked. There's a lot to that term.
Yeah, definitely. And I was going to touch on that. You hit a period where you can get into a pretty deep state of self-loathing when you're going through all that shadow work and coming to terms with where you may have fallen short within your own life. And I know that lasted for a couple years, maybe even 3 years for me. And that's probably the hardest part, really, is recognizing your responsibility and your role that you play in everything that's happening right now. And then speaking on the dualistic aspect of the mind there, I guess that could come down to like a passive and and sorry, what's the other word I'm looking for?
Well, active, right?
Active
Passive.
and active and passive, correct. And would you say that it's our active mind or will, the aspect that you were touching on that contains our conscious and everything, that's what's really been hijacked from us, leaving us with the passive aspect, allowing us to accept everything that's handed out and spoon fed to us, including opinions that aren't our own, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. See, so there's some supervailing ability that directs the will, and this has been a big undercurrent in philosophy, whether the will directs itself,
Yeah.
whether the will is positive or negative, right? Whether those types of human traits can be even, attributed to the will, it goes on and on and on, right? But the simplest way is that, look, we're bioenergy, right? There's a flow between the mind, the insubstantial mind, and the physical. And people like Wilhelm Reich have the best description of all of that, right? So the way it is that strangely, our learning process by which we get reason, by which we get intelligent, also involves the principle of negation, meaning that the unfree know more about freedom than anybody else.
Yeah.
The guy locked up in the jail knows the smell of grass better than the guy's walking on it every day, never notices it, right? And so on. So there's a strange quirk of human consciousness by which we are capable not only of learning positively from a thing, but also through its negation. You learn what love and care is when the woman's out the door and off in the taxi.
Yeah.
Oh dear, right? And vice versa. So we are capable of learning from positive experience and positive tuition, and we're also can learn deconstructively through the opposite, through a kind of a
Apophatic, right? Isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's it, apophatic, an alternative way, and the opposite. Like the thing is negated.
Yeah.
So this then answers your question, and that is that there's two wills. The will can learn this way or can learn that way. And I think that the self, right, learns more with this apophatic aspect of breaking a thing down or learning what it is not. Whereas the superego can do it as well, but it prefers to learn directly, straightforwardly. This is page 1 in black and white, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I find it at section such and such, like a law book, right?
Yeah.
The left brain, ego and left brain are identical. The left brain has built a world like that. Jesus, right? Everything is chapter and versed.
Yeah.
The right brain goes, I don't need any of that structure to get the point.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, I don't like that. Mommy, I don't like that person. That's left brain. She goes, what are you talking about? He's wearing a suit. He's got 3 stripes. He's smiling. He gave you a penny.
Yeah.
No, mommy, I don't like that person. There it is. Left brain, right brain. 2 different voices. Should I now agree with this idiot, right, who's going to be raped or murdered, right, thinking he's such a nice guy, right?
Yeah.
Child knows, the animal knows, right? So we have a decision every day in our life which voice to listen to. If you listen to this, well, you have to listen to that because that woman is older, she's your mother, and she does have a lot of experience, but you don't listen to it all the time. You see, so we have this going back and forth. We have our subconscious and we have our intuition, but there's times when no matter what the intuition is demanding and says, you have to go along with it.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to, there's sometimes when you have to negate it.
Yeah.
Because I need that bloody paycheck.
Yeah.
Right? And here I am flipping burgers with this fucking drug addict freak, right? Or whatever. With all these hideous, murderous jokes, like people in prison.
Yeah.
Where they've got to listen to some rapist telling you all about his wonderful exploits. Right? I hate this guy, but if I cause a conflict now, what am I going to do? It's going to make the whole thing even worse.
Yeah.
Right? So I have to get along with the humor of the idiot, and deal with him later, right? So always, 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 it's a seesaw effect. And that's what we've got to get used to. We've got to get used to the nausea, the seasickness of life.
Yeah.
What Heidegger called errancy, a basic errancy by which you can't walk on a straight road all the time. You can't have everything being perfectly flat like our world today, the millennials want. No interest in history. History began when I was born. Sure, my date of birth, anything before that, it's meaningless.
Yeah, history began with Facebook, eh?
Yeah. We're joking, but this is a fact.
It's true.
Why are you bothering me with anything before I was born? I'm getting triggered.
Yeah.
What do you do with people like that, right?
Yeah, for sure.
My God, even a rodent, even a hamster in a cage has more capacity to memorize something from the past than these people do, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I definitely agree with those points that you're making, and I guess it goes along with the culture of escapism. I think, I've really been noticing. It's all about, even when you're not currently escaping from reality, it's all about looking ahead to your next escape from reality, right? So, the whole time you're working, you're waiting for the weekend. And, even greater than that, you're waiting for your holiday, or you're waiting for this, you're waiting for that, you're waiting to go home and watch TV, you're waiting for the next big sports game. And all of this is taking us out of living in the moment as well, right? Which is really where all the power lies, because this is where you have the ability to learn from the past, change the future, and act. It's all right now. So, in a lot of the research I've been doing, I've noticed that stealing the present moment from us is one of the main pillars of the mental and spiritual and emotional manipulation going on in society.
And your body can help you there, because it's a kind of a grounding. I always, when somebody says like what you said to me, I always look at it in strictly bioenergetic or psychosomatic. The grounding in the now is a very physical thing. Mm-hmm. It's not a mental thing, because if you try it mentally, it doesn't work. It keeps flitting away from you. It's something. Well, grounding means, the first kind of grounding is to be aware of your body, and then your body in the moment and in the now. Smelling the air, looking at the quality of the light around you, seeing your temperature, your mood, your ambiance, your room. Right? You need to be, that to me is being in the now. And then when you mention these moments of escape, they are bad. But one thing that can be said of them is, remember when I talked just a few minutes ago about the reset moment, the reset ability to just, that's what they are, but it goes haywire, right? Moments of evasion like that are actually each of us seeking for a moment of spiritual reset.
Sure.
Right? Where we get to the balcony and look over and surveil and pull back from the canvas. We have lost what we're doing, so it becomes this weird, escapism that you're speaking about, which isn't good, which is just erstwhile, and vapid. And then it's never really satisfactory. Even if you've gone on the greatest tour, you might get a couple of, temporary highs, and maybe even a little bit of rest, but mostly we don't. Even in the recreational aspects, we're rarely rested.
Yeah.
And we certainly never have a reset. I'm really meaning when somebody is, attempting to, say, lie on their back in the pool and float there, right? There's two different kinds of people to do that. There's one who's literally, his mind is somewhere else. And there's somebody who's really there looking at the clouds and being really present. And so there's nothing wrong with these recreational moments. But what I feel that they are, unbeknownst to most people, is this psychological need to have this, gray area, this kind of reset zone, this kind of neutral meeting point, like a kind of a no man's land point of where it's a neutral territory. Yeah. We have been denied that. There's so many pressures of existence on the ego to exist, to work, to be on the ball, answer the telephone, and all the rest of it. There's so much pressure being a self, being an individual. And that's quite right, perfectly normal that we have these escape moments. But unfortunately, we've lost the ability, to really sort of understand what they are when we're in nature or whatever. We're always taking our skis along, and I constantly am taking walks where I see these people with their headphones on, and jogging or whatever they're doing. It's pathetic. It's so pathetic. Right? You're actually in nature. How much time do you actually spend in nature? Very little. But then the time you do spend it, I got these Radio 1 blasting in my ears. Brilliant.
Yeah. Well, this is why meditation is so important, in my opinion, as well, right? Because even when you're sleeping, your brain is still, running at 1,000 miles a minute, right? So taking that conscious time to meditate and self-reflect, and even bring yourself to a state where you're doing your best not to contemplate or think of anything at all for short periods of time can go a long way to improving your all-around existence. And I've noticed in my life that since I've been applying regular meditation pretty much every day, I've felt the need to escape a lot less. And, a lot of people, when they talk to me about getting away, I kind of laugh and I say, well, I enjoy my life, so there's nothing to get away from, right? But, I definitely agree with you. Whenever, especially if you're in a corporation or something, like when I was running my business, when I would go on holidays, I'd have to answer the phone all day still, or nothing would get done at the company, right? Like when you're at the top of the chain, there's certain things that you have to have your hands on unless you can find somebody else to take your place, which isn't always possible when you're a small business owner, and that's why they call it a business, right? It's busyness. It'll keep you busy until the day you die. And yeah, whenever I got away for it, I'd take a week off and come back more tired than when I left my job, right? Yeah, and that reconnection to nature, Michael. I have to tell you a story about something that happened to me just recently. We went on a short trip to the Okanagan Valley. It's in the Rocky Mountains. Well, I guess just part of the Rocky Mountains up in Canada here, so just north of California. And we spent a few days at my brother's house, and we did quite a few awesome nature hikes. And on one of these hikes, we went to a waterfall called Rainbow Falls, and it's a really big waterfall. It's not as big as Niagara Falls or anything. It's probably, I don't know, maybe 60 or 70 feet tall and maybe 50, 60 feet wide. So there's a lot of energy coming out of this waterfall. And I was lucky enough to be able to hike down behind the waterfall and get right in behind the water. And while the water's falling, it's like creating this torrent of air, like this backdraft that like almost feels like it's going to lift you off of the ground. And the sound's so intense, and like you can feel the vibration in the ground you're standing on. And it was such an intense experience for me. I've noticed that since that experience, like my perspective, especially towards nature, has totally changed. Like driving back home, living in Alberta, I've lived in this province my whole life, and it was like coming to a totally new part of the world almost. Everything had a new beauty to it. And yeah, like that reconnection to nature, even just for a few moments, nothing else existed to me. All that was there was like the sound and the vibration and the wetness and the air, like all the elements were present, and just like totally overloading my senses. And it's the first experience in nature that I've had like that. I know it definitely won't be the last now. And like you say, I think pretty much everybody is missing that connection with nature, even when they are in nature, right?
Absolutely right. And it's part of our urbanization, which again has positive aspects, right? These are the cultural sort of positives and negatives, right? And then there's the umwelt, which is the world around nature. And so it's perfectly correct that we have society and we have culture. There's nothing wrong with it. It's part of being who we are in the true Hegelian sense, is to be a self, to be a social self, and to be a natural self, right? Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, the negative is that we've basically, expunged nature from that urban setting. Well, some people are more guilty of this than others. And so one has to almost now go out of their way, to have nature and animals around, or as you said, get out to nature and have these experiences. And so that is a huge missing piece, right now. And there's a whole study of that, what can be done. Because remember, isn't it true that most communities really should only have about 5,000 people in them? This goes to the heart of what true capitalism would be and all of these other paradigms, right? But I look at it just as a affirmation of the natural, and that is that our societies, should never be more than 5,000 people in that community, and probably even less. So once you don't have that, America did have it. This is the most bizarre thing, and then these cities got just jam-packed, they became metropolises, and this is a huge, problem. All this running around and never being alone for 1 second, never even knowing. Even a child may never know at all what it is to be alone, what silence is, what aloneness is. It'll all be considered negative as hell. And also, what is it wrong with our culture that doesn't realize that we are natural beings as well? So we need that connection. Those are our roots. Yeah. And so, yeah, walking on the beach, and seeing the sunset, and it's real good when parents, take the children out once a week, and in a meditative way, not just as a form of recreation. Nature is just a recreation theme park, like most people think of it today, but really take them out and ask them what is light, and get them interested in the mysteries of things as well. Because right now we're living in a culture where the biggest danger is man is no longer a mystery to himself. But as an adjunct to that, nature, the world around, is no longer a mystery. Science has explained it, or will. The questioning process is over. My sense of wonder, my sense of awe, you see, is over. We're being, steamrolled right now. I mean, people are literally have been tenderized this for decades, since the end of the Second World War and probably before, but certainly it really ramped up then because you had TV in the corner of the room, and, not that TV is negative in itself, but all of these factors added up to isolating man. Now we're living in a completely digital kingdom of pixels, which is a curtain between us and the real again. Most people's experience of flowers or nature or sunlight is on a screen, not in the, in the real life. I mean, look at these kids in Japan, that stay in the room all day long, and we'll soon have the Western version of that. Or we have it now where certain people can't even take their kids out because nature's dirty. You can't have them rolling around, and oh my God, they'll get germs and all of this nonsense. Again, this is really, really, the ultra feminization of our culture, and so much could be said about that. What time are we doing? Are we past an hour or two?
We're at close to an hour and a half here now. So.
Oh, good man.
Yeah. Do you want to keep going, or?
Yeah, we can go for half an hour. Why not? Just
Awesome.
wanted to double check. I kind of lost the feed.
Yeah. Going back to what you were saying about nature being dirty and whatnot, I really love the bits George Carlin has relating to that. He says we used to swim in raw sewage. Like we were tempered in shit and we never got sick, right? It's obviously true, and it's so funny, like you have these parents that are immunizing their children because supposedly a vaccine contains a little bit of the virus, so your body can build an immunity towards it, right? And they'll pretend to understand this concept, but they think that washing your hands every day with hand sanitizer 20 times a day is not going to have a negative effect on your immune system, right? Like,
remember you said earlier that pathology breeds pathology, trauma will breed trauma. The more and more and more you get into that mindset, the more and more you attract the very germs and because you're pathological.
That's right.
Right? You're so scared of life that now you've made yourself vulnerable to a potential danger.
This gets into epigenetics and everything as well, right? And, one of the easiest to listen to researchers on that front would be Bruce Lipton, I guess, and he puts out some great work. And again, I think too many people are looking at this from a new age perspective, similar to The Secret, right? No, sorry, you can't just kind of think, for example, I'm muscular, I'm built, I'm ripped. You can't just think that every day, not take any action, and then become this bodybuilder or this Olympic athlete, right? I think that epigenetics go hand in hand with consciousness and spirituality and all that as well, right?
Yeah. And you're quite right. You see, it's back to that abuse of the ego. The negative side of the ego is you are quite free to think that for 80 years nonstop.
Yeah.
So we have abused our freedom. It's so incredible, this. We are free to do and think and to change, but in some sense, we've let that become inflated, and we overbelieve it. You have the freedom to believe anything you want. Right? Schizophrenics believe whatever they want, so they're the example that the mind can believe whatever it wants. You can be Napoleon. You can really believe yourself to be Jesus Christ. Yeah. So this incredible freedom, which told idealists something far different, it took idealists to the core of reality, that fact. But everybody else seems to abuse it because now you have no restraint on that freedom, right? You're not aware of how to use the freedom. So it's like giving a paintbrush to a monkey. It doesn't have the faintest idea what it is or what it does with it. It just makes a lot of bright colors, but you're never going to get real art out of it because there's no experience. There's no conceptualization there. So what they're splattering, humans are copying them now, but that's not art, right? That is just whatever it is. It never should be called art. Art is only something that comes with conceptuality, which is a certain structural arrangement of experience, right? With a will and with an intent and with something even deeper than that. With a monkey cannot understand that the universe wants it, right, to conceive and to form a picture of itself. But the human does. The human realizes on some implicit level that I'm in dialogue with the universe, and the universe wants me to construct a very coherent picture. And what we call sanity is the most constructive picture I can get. And so my art is my way of working through that and working that. Any other animal form, God love them, right? Or not in touch with that. And that's right. They shouldn't be. They have the intelligence of the physiosphere and the biosphere, which are high forms of intelligence. We have intelligence of the noosphere, which demands something more of us, right?
Yeah.
So again, we had, in order for this process to take place, the absolute soil of reality had to be freedom.
Yeah.
So once you understand this principle, any talk about determinism is null and void. I don't care who is speaking of it and why they're speaking of it, some religious nutter or some of these other determinists that you get in philosophy. It's a mute point. Yeah. Freedom is the essence. And so if deterministic or fixed structures, emerge from that, yeah, they exist. But my goodness, can't we see that it must be a free will that creates a fixed machine, not a fixed machine that can ever bring up free will? Why are we even still talking about this? It's absolutely, freshmen could understand it.
Yeah, for sure.
And the idealists took this to mean that there's a willful and good God or spirit, behind all of creation.
Yeah. Well, and I was just going to bring up related to that as well. I think that a lot of that comes from a childish perspective of any sort of creative energy source for the universe, right? When you look at that as some man with a big gray beard sitting on a throne dictating, what right and wrong is and tossing some people into the flames and bringing some people up to heaven, you're not going to develop a realistic perspective of reality based on that, right? A childish perspective is good in some ways, but I think that many people are failing to recognize where all we're attempting to do is use the best terminology we can in the language that we speak to try to communicate ideas that don't exist in this realm, right? So it's even harder to convey. It's hard to convey them, and even less likely that the average mind can understand them, right?
And we don't understand them. See, remember we talked about how innocence, it can be the autistic innocence, or it can be the polymorph perversity of the child, or it can be an innocence of the sage.
Yeah.
What the child cannot do, well, the child is the empty vessel, and then it fills. The sage is the empty vessel, is the full vessel who knows how to empty it at certain times. So the innocence of reflecting over what you already know, right? And we said reshuffle it, but there's many times in which sometimes in order to get the greatest insights, you have to throw out, but you do it ritualistically. You don't do it contemptuously like a materialist or somebody else who's basically a cynic. If you were to go through a rite of passage in which everything you know is wrong, right, which is the brilliant statement by Lloyd Pye, the secret of being refilled with a greater truth is how you empty the bowl. Yeah. It's a very Zen thing. It's not empty. I'll fuck off and I'll dump it all out. Give me some more. That's materialism on the spiritual level.
Yeah.
You alluded to the different kinds of materialism earlier. One of them is that the spiritual man can be the most materialist asshole there is because he still wants, except instead of wanting a fleet of yachts and some a bunch of Porsches in his driveway, he wants spiritual enlightenment.
Yeah.
It's no different. Right, and the greatest sages saw that. They saw it's just materialism under different guise.
Yeah.
But the sage who's aware of a dynamic, when he is ready to empty his bowl, right, and come back to sort of zero, he is emptying it out with a reverence, saying, "Thank you for that. This served me at that time. Yeah. Now I offer it out as I pour it back onto the earth. I pour it back to the universe where it came from. Yeah. I'm glad to be empty again." That is a very rich innocence and a very rich, deep emptiness. And yes, our whole society right now is being asked to do that. Yeah. It comes up in individual lives, and look around us right now. Look at the planet Pluto and its movement. We are demanded now as a society to be able to empty that out. And the people who are at the lead, who are at the helm cannot do that. They're desperately threatened. Yeah. And then they, as we're not going to discuss here, but they go through their own motions of offsetting that process, right? That's a whole subject in itself. But an individual could be asked to do that, at a given point.
Yeah, definitely. Before we run out of time, I would like to hit on a different aspect of the same topic, and one that I haven't heard you cover too much. I'd like to get into entheogens with you a little bit. Mind-altering substances, psilocybin, cannabis, LSD. I'm more of a proponent of natural entheogens, and based on my research and personal experimentation, I think that a lot of this can interact with people on a genetic level. And I think that different cultures have different plant guides and spirit guides that can help them along their specific path or journey. That being said, obviously all of these substances can be abused, and just like any other tool, they can be used for good or negative purposes. But I would like to get your perspective on that a little bit, and hear where you're coming from.
Well, I'm absolutely against it.
Okay.
And the only caveat to that would be if you're using, say, hemp or cannabis for health,
Yeah.
physical health, then I'm for it, because it's wonderful stuff. And hemp should definitely be used, as a plant for medication and for household goods and all of that. Right? It's a remarkable plant, and if you are a traditional native person, that's their culture. So I allow that, right? If you want to be pedantic about it, then I step back, go, what the fuck has it got to do with me, right? Because they have an ancient connection to those plants in a way that, none of us in the West could possibly simulate, right? So, and then really, it's like this, right? There is a bona fide Western magical tradition, bona fide Western philosophical tradition. So my entire focus is on that.
Yeah.
And therefore, anything that takes away from it, I have to be quite strict about it. If you and me were sitting around on the beach, I might say, hey, what the fuck, I'm not that strict. If it was just between you and me, right? Or if somebody I knew, well, actually, this kind of happened. Somebody I knew went off and was smoking drugs or whatever, right? I had to go through a cathartic experience there to say, well, fuck, what shit, whoa, don't like that. So I had to look at why I didn't like it.
Yeah.
And go through my own process, and it all worked out well at that point, so everything was fine. But as a teacher, so to speak, because I let people be as absolutely free. I've been around drug users all my life, right? I've seen the worst that could happen to them on multiple occasions, and I will admit I've seen some relatively positive things as well. Although I focus more on the health issue, then I'm a complete advocate, absolutely complete advocate. My God, anything that contradicts big pharma and this white coat, allopathic system.
Yeah.
And if that includes entheogens, like you say, and medical cures, homeopathic or pharmacopoeia, right? I'm absolutely for that. Yeah. What I'm not for it is as a replacement for, spiritual experiences, because I'm such a believer, right? In the sort of the Western magical tradition and all of that. Yeah. So I have to be a little bit, narrow, and retentive about that. Yeah. Because remember, as a teacher, right, when you're speaking, and I've been in it about 30 years now, I think something like that, started in 98, right, whatever that is back. So when you say this, they run and believe it, do it.
Yeah. And
I'm responsible. I'm fucking responsible now.
Yeah.
Right? And if you don't say it, you're not into it, then they're going to change because you said that.
Yeah.
Right? They're I've had people call me a guru and a new age guru, when every word I was saying was against being exactly that. So look at how ignorant people are, right? So I had to be super aware of what I say. You know what I mean? And all my life I've been around holistic people, right? Everyone I've ever encountered and been close to has been basically up there, high up in the holistic, movement.
Yeah.
So it's not for me to say, well, yeah, you can't use aromatherapy and back floor remedies, and you can't smoke a bit of weed if you're dying of cancer, right? But you see, when you're public and you get asked that question a lot or whatever, and you're what I mean, it's impossible. It's impossible to go and didactically say that because that worked for me, it's going to work for all of you, So I've had to be very circumspect talking about that subject, because I just know what kind of, audiences sitting there just waiting for you to endorse it, and then they go off and do it, and they could have a terrible, 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 terrible experience. Likes of which the human mind cannot even, and I'm so frightfully aware of that, of the negative experiences that can happen under the influence of those things, or that a person's whole life could be ruined and thrown into the pits of despair and hell and insanity. There's no way after experiencing those things, you see, that I can, in good faith, espouse them at all to anybody who's looking for a quick back door. And that person may be perfectly right in their own way. They may come from a little conscious state. Life feels very hopeless. and they picked a couple of mushrooms around. I hung out with kids like this in the back streets of Belfast. I actually gave lectures, to all these fucking drug addict fuckers. The guys from my school, right? You'd meet them at the park, and they're all high. They're coming around going, and they're lost. Some of them are like on the edge of insanity. I've actually, helped them on multiple occasions, talked them through it and let them, because they were seeing things. They couldn't understand. And I quickly explained it to them. It's perfectly natural. And they were back, snapped right back. Oh, all right, then it's fine. But 1 minute ago, their souls were on the edge.
Yeah.
I just said, look, I can't, now that I'm really, going onto the public stage, after Get the America and all this career thing started up, I just said, no, I can't go down there. But that doesn't mean that I negate a person's intuitive, need, because I've seen that need in people. And don't forget that some of the greatest bands that have ever freaking lived, right? The Moody Blues, Pink Floyd, what would they be without those drug experiences? Yeah. So again, it's a mixed bag, Jay, as you well know.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, the show is called Cognitive Concurrence, so I don't want to get into a debate on the topic at all. But what I did want to bring up is, just as with the genetic trauma, it goes back thousands of years, and it's fostered in us at a genetic level. So too, I think, are some of these plant remedies. They have a genetic connection with us. At some level, and I agree with you. There are some cultures, more recently the Native American cultures, they still kind of have a grasp on that, and they're still connected with that. But the disconnection over the past couple of generations, I don't think that takes away from any sort of genetic connection that someone may have with something. That being said, you're left kind of experimenting at that point and trying to see what works for you, and that could have negative results for some people. But going back to a lot of the work that you've done, like going back to the Druids and whatnot, isn't psilocybin one of the substances that they utilized in some rituals?
Yeah, but you're talking about highly purified people who probably were using it mostly for medical purposes, like I'm saying.
Yeah.
I don't think they used it for out-of-body experiences. That tradition has never been substantiated at all.
Yeah.
The closest you get to it, and even then you're miles away. The story about Odin hanging on the tree of life and all of that. And the tree of life can sometimes be, thought of as pharmacopoeia. You see, it's like this. Let me also qualify what I'm saying here. Drugs in the form of psilocybin, right, and Amanita muscaria, is one of the foundations of our civilization.
Yeah. It
didn't play a part in these ancient groups. It was the basis of everything they were into, right? So, you couldn't come to the end, right, of unpacking this story. So it wasn't that it was used only for transport of the mind, or it was only used for health. It was the fundamental symbolism, right? And the clearest proof of this is religion. I've got a whole website on it, right? I've got 2 volumes on it, with 700 color pictures, right, in the Trees of Life double volume, to go into this whole pharmacopoeia idea. And even that is merely scratching the surface. We're going to do more shows on it as we go down the line, to show that every tradition you can think of. Let me give you an example, if I can. Drinking tea, right? Drinking tea. You know that the old English custom, or this weird peccadillo where everybody talks about the weather, and no matter what tragedy struck me, you want a cup of tea, lad? We'll put the kettle on. That ritual of feeling soothed by tea has got nothing to do with tea.
Yeah,
it's got to do with concoctions that were made thousands of years before time, in the prehistoric period, to calm you down, right? Yeah. The ale house, the merry men, right? The thing goes on. The idea of taking an elixir that calms me down after a tragedy. This is one thing. And the tea ritual, the whole nonsense of it, right, is absolutely a throwback to that. So even as a prosaic a thing as drinking tea actually awakens an atavistic memory of the time when you actually did, take psilocybin or took something else that calmed your ass down. And it wasn't just herbal, right? It had these other capacities as well. And, this is a very, to me, very sacred area to get into. And we will be touching on it briefly, in works to come. But when I say the foundation of a lot, do you realize that even most of the etymology I'm a big advocate of etymology, right?
Yeah.
You could not come to the end of the etymology that comes out of the, let's just call it the Dionysian cult.
Yeah.
In both its positive and negative. Yeah. Goddess traditions, tree worship. The thing is immense, right, when you get into it. So when I say that, just to qualify what I said about, I was thinking in terms not just of native groups, you see, but of the indigenous prehistoric.
Sure.
Right? In fact, yeah, that reminds me. I did something on Unslaved called The Daemons, the story of the little people. Now that I come to a couple of months ago. So people can watch that, where I get into this, what I've just been saying, and show how that there was a race on this planet called the little people, right?
Yeah.
So to speak. Even someone could be 4 foot tall, 5 foot, but generally it means what it says, 3 feet high people, right? And our whole world had this race, and they were big into this. So don't even get me started on this mushroom cult stuff, because I did 2 volumes on it, and then there's this little people concept, and it has crept in, to the Christmas ritual and various other symbolism, that we see in movies and all. But I've unpacked that, to about 70%. We're going to be doing more on it, showing just how much of our cultural elements are indeed based in it.
Yeah. Do you think that maybe a large influencing factor on that would be intent, as in, again, if you're going into it as a form of escapism, obviously, that would have different results than going into it as a form of self-discovery. Or, because from my experience with it, the easiest way to explain it would be it sort of removes your ego and allows you to look at yourself without some of those other filters that you have in a regular brain state. So, I think that's why it can be really negative and scary for a lot of people. Whereas if you're prepared for that and you're going into that with that specific intent of self-respect and healing, I think it can have different results and everything, right? So
I'm pretty sure that's 100% true, because in the instances where I knew that people lost their minds, right, by taking it, their intent was shit from the start.
Yeah.
But because I may have been too young to advise them, or there was nobody who was in the earth could advise them, right? So I can only see that from personal experience as being 100% true. Plus the universal truth that intent in any regard, anything you're into is very important.
Yeah.
So, but in this regard, it's even more important. And also, don't forget that Freud wasn't 100% wrong. There is a Thanatos instinct, maybe a small t, not all caps like he tried to push. But, he wasn't 100% right. There's a death instinct in people.
Yeah.
There's an end of their psychic life. There's a prescience or prevoyance in people who kind of know how much energy they've got, mostly for hedonic. I'm not talking about any elevated thing here. Yeah. People kind of know when the party's over, when I've done it all.
Yeah.
And so they need more and more extreme rides, right? And the most extreme ride for hedonistic people like that, especially episodic hedonistic people, is to take drugs.
Yeah.
Because they're trying to suck more marrow out of life. This is why I object to it, right? If it's done in a way that you're describing, more of a shamanic way, that Micheal has no statement at all to make about that, right?
Yeah.
I just find the subject absolutely fascinating,
Yeah.
And I wrote these books on it, and they're some of the finest books I ever did, right? I was so absolutely elated when they came out, because there's been a long fucking time waiting to get around to that subject, right? And to do it right as well.
Yeah.
To be neutral, not to advocate anything, but just to study the subject of it, right? Which has connections to astrotheology, the stellar cult, the Irish Druids, as you quite rightly said.
Yeah.
But it's coming at a slightly different angle, because those ancient people, the reasons why they were doing it was because of trauma, where we are back to square one, right?
True.
If the Arctic homeland fell, Atlantis, if people prefer to use that phrase, but in Nordic mythology, it's Hyperborea, it's Ultima Thule, which fell. It's the reality that fell, right? And Yggdrasil, the great tree, fell over. Mm-hmm. Tolkien had his own way of phrasing it, and the Nordic myths have. Now, when that world fell, it was a paradisical world, in many respects. And so the Druid knew that we are utterly traumatized, like we started off. And so one of the ways that they hoped that could bring back, to a very, very shattered type of mentality and for other reasons as well, even because they understood it was not just a mentality, but a physicality that was shot.
Yeah.
Yes, they did use the soma. They did use the elixir, right? And many other plant, derivatives that they used. And this is where tree symbolism then really begins. The tree was considered one, just like the Jed column, the raising of the column and the obelisk in the Egyptian. For the Druid, the tree became the symbol of return to order, right? It did, it really did. And so a lot of buildings, a lot of construction, a lot of the symbolism surrounded this, and it always had a background of trauma or a background of a fall or some kind of battle or some kind of Armageddon situation. So when Genesis opens with its two trees, it's quite clear from the Hebrew writing of Genesis, tohu, bohu, or it's called in Hebrew, that this is a restoration of a garden. This is a recreation, right? Not in the Christian, when it was translated, this is the first garden, or God's first 7 days of creation. No. This in the Hebrew is clearly a remaking and a instantiation of creation. Yeah. And the trees are central then. That's why, because the tree was the pillar of the earth. And under the tree and on the tree grows the berries, right? The deer eat off the berries, and so on. And this whole concept of that the earth is helping us to heal and we're helping it. And out of that came this whole psilocybin, this whole Dionysian, what's the word? The pharmacopoeia. And John Allegro is one of the great authorities on that. He found out that Christianity is entirely based on that. So I go into that in all the books and everything like that. And you're quite right. There's a whole study there. But when it comes down to somebody filling their own fucking void, because they've done it all, right? So-called done it all, and now have to go toward, something that is more sensation, more stimulation. No, I'm not going to endorse that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I really wanted to get your personal perspective on it because, like you said, I've really only heard you mention it from a very neutral perspective. So, thank you for that. We are coming up to 2 hours here, so I know we'll probably be bringing it to an end here. But before I let you go, Micheal, I actually have a question that I would like to bring up from a close friend of mine, if you wouldn't mind. So she was asking. That she descends from a line where the females carry the O negative genes. So every generation, the females continue to carry this O negative blood in their veins. And she says that in her initiation, she's being guided towards a path of healing and helping others. She's wondering if you've noticed a correlation between blood types and different genetics and different sort of what spiritual paths, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Something I've never looked into, I really couldn't comment because I don't know anything about that subject. Sorry.
Yeah, awesome. Well, it was definitely worth bringing it up to you. I know that you've researched.
There may be something to it.
Yeah.
But I suggest that she, researches it. These are the most fascinating subjects, but I would never be competent enough to say one way or the other.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. I can totally respect that. So. Well, yeah, I guess, like I said, we're coming up to the end of 2 hours here, so I think that we could probably wrap it up here. Before we get going, I would really like you to just let everybody know about all of your websites and everything. I know you have several different websites, so if you want to point everybody towards those, go ahead.
Thank you. I think we've had about up to 14 different sites and channels. Some have been closed and some of them have been closed by forces we would rather not speak about. There's over 7.
Wow.
4 channels, 3 Facebook pages. That's 7. I think maybe even more. So we've had the encounter of that. It's kind of what really forced us to go and create Unslaved. My colleague David Whitehead, I had the URL for many, many years, and then he came along and said, what about this? And it turned out that he thought it would be better to have our own podcast and be off of social media.
Yeah.
And I was absolutely elated about that. So we've been doing that for about two years now, and it's been very, very successful. So people can come to unslaved.com. We have a podcast every week. Yeah. We just did one on the Black nobility, And that comes from a website I have called the Female Illuminati. So there's, but if you want to, if people wanted to get in touch with all my sites, just go to michealtsarion.com or msar.com for short, and you'll see links there to all the other sites and writings. Everything's really pristine now, really beautifully, polished and articulated. Been working on those for the best part of 20 years.
Yeah.
And so everything has just come together really, really nice. There's lots of different sites, because the one thing I can't stand is, to be a one-track pony.
Yeah.
So from the very beginning, I've had a multiplicity of different studies, different interests, but how to present them was very difficult. And the internet was the way, making modulated websites. And so if somebody has an interest in this, but couldn't care less about tarot or astrology, they're able to go to just one site.
Yeah.
Astrotheology or whatever it might be, Female Illuminati. Then we recently did Dragon Mother. That came out in like 2-3 years ago. And I've just put the final touches to that. That Dragon Mother's interesting, another thesis. So that, and as I say, the final touches were put there in last month with the final article there. So, and in fact, Female Illuminati was concluded this week, final article put there. So,
wow.
Yeah, so this is the absolute perfect time for people to visit the site, because I'm real proud of them and all the information they contain.
Yeah, and like I said, your work is extensive, right? Like I don't know if there's a topic that you don't cover.
Blood types.
Yeah, well, I guess, right? But yeah, definitely check out Michael's work if you haven't, guys. And if you haven't heard of Michael yet, I don't know where you've been. But I guess that's because you're one of the first influencing factors for me.
Thanks to you to bring me on. I mean, it's not a huge concern, but it would certainly tell anybody with a modicum of wits that if somebody can find 800, 1,000, 1,100 other people who are nobodies in this movement and bring them on, right?
Yeah.
And then call you in some of the earlier stages, that can be very, very disconcerting. But it's the opposite when somebody like yourself, does so, because I think that's respectful. Excuse me for being, pompous about it, but to me that's respectful, and I'll definitely want to support a person, doing the work that you're doing, and give that time. But I just will not give it to people who are disrespectful anymore. Those days are long gone.
Yeah.
And people will not understand what I said, because in earlier podcasts, people got used to those. They thought they were really great and everything, but they're not great. You're constantly being interrupted. There's commercials galore. The time is too short. You can't extrapolate like we've done on some of the more subtleties. So, I know people got to love a lot of the stuff that was in the past, and they have fond memories and all, but, we got to move on. The platform changes right under your feet. We have more time, we have better technology, better podcasting services. Yeah. And that's what I'm really all about. I really think it's great, and I'd like to talk to you more, maybe about Black Nobility or Dragon Mother or anything like that you want to talk about, or anything. I've really enjoyed this, and I really want to thank you for, getting hold of me there, Ryan, mate.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Michael. And yeah, I would definitely like to have you on discussing the Dragon Mother, which is your latest work, if I'm correct, right?
Yeah.
So you just published volume 2, isn't that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. Idealisim came out in April and May. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, definitely would love to have you on again if you're willing to.
Totally.
Thanks a lot. And to everybody out there, once again, I'm your host, Jay Anarchon. Website is cognitiveconcurrence.com. Be sure to join me here for many more great conversations with other individuals that I greatly respect. Thanks again, Michael. Take care.
Cheers, mate. Cheers.